In this chapter, we're looking at basically firms that are somewhere between the two extremes in terms of their pricing power. Those firms that are perfectly competitive and thus have no pricing power, and those that are monopolists and have complete pricing power. Um, on this spectrum, if we were to draw this out here, imagine that's a straight line. With perfect competition on one end and monopolies on the other. This chapter looks at oligopolies and monopolistic competition. So that's what we're going to look at here. Okay. So, what's the definition of them first? A monopolistically competitive firm is basically probably the most popular type of, or most realistic type of competitive structure we see out there, which is that firms build a product that is more or less the same, but not completely the same. And so these firms are, in some sense, a bit monopolistic because no product is exactly like theirs, but the differences of that one product are not that big of a difference from the other to make it completely unique and that there be any pricing power. Moreover, the product isn't that essential to life or anything like that. And so individuals, for the most part, are going to be pretty sensitive to price changes. Lots of examples of monopolistically competitive structures. Go to any grocery store and you'll see lots of examples. Um, let's see. How many were there? Uh, Today, when I was at Safeway, there were at least 6 different types of balsamic vinegar um, that were available. They actually all came from the same region of Italy as well. So it wasn't even like one was from like Utah or something like that. um, that's pretty monopolistically competitive. Lots of different varieties of milk, of cheese, of yogurt, of eggs, of um, you know, you pick it. And it's not just unique to the grocery store. You would see it if you went to Home Depot and you were trying to buy something like a tool, like a hammer, or anything really like that. Um, Oligopolies are also encountered from time to time. Um, these are where you basically have only a few firms competing within a market, and there's some ways that new entry into that market is stopped. The airlines are a great example of an oligopoly. If we think of the number of airlines that, not necessarily Honolulu, which is kind of a major destination, but if we look at kind of like a second tier city, like hmm, trying to think of a good example of an airport. Well, without naming a specific city, typically what you see in a city is that there's usually one dominant player, and then all of the rest kind of share a little portion of it. Um, and as a kind of an example of that, let's see here. No, I'm not. I'm not going to extend our time here. Never mind. Um, but if you pick any kind of second tier city, You might see that like a Southwest Airlines or a Delta is the dominant player, and then American United and everyone else kind of like pick up all the scraps. Um, and if the gates for the airport are controlled, meaning that there's not a lot of new entry, then what you'll find is that restriction to entry into the market allows for some sustained profits. In these oligopolies, you typically will find some degree of a cartel, even though cartels are illegal. There's usually some degree in which firms are trying to at least subtly coordinate their prices and their output levels. So, um, let's start with monopolistically competitive firms. What would we say about these kinds of firms? What are their characteristics? Again, they're selling a slightly differentiated product. The products themselves are not too different from the products being sold by someone else. So there's not a lot of pricing power. And that's because these products have a lot of substitutes and they are um, highly elastic in terms of price. Additionally, we do see that free entry and exit, and it allows firms to react to um, what the pricing levels and profit levels are so that they can then enter industries where they feel they could make a profit and exit industries where they feel they would lose money. And so, when you draw this out, let's make this a big picture here. Sorry. So, when we draw this out for the monopolistically competitive firm, what you'll notice here is that the marginal revenue curve is steeper than the demand curve. It's not twice as steep, but it is at least steeper. And so, in this sense, you follow the rules for a monopoly, where you set the MR equal to MC, define price and quantity. You set MR equal to MC to find quantity. And like you do for a monopoly, you'd then go up to the demand curve to find the price. So I find this, that gives me my quantity. Then I go up to my demand curve to find my price. You will see here a deadweight loss. And you will see here, at least for right now, this monopolistically competitive firm is making, it looks like, a small profit to the extent it exceeds above average costs. But the point is that this short run profit isn't going to exist forever. Because what would another firm do? They'd be like, wow, dude, this market, you make a money. So there would be entry, which we would understand as demand curve. The demand overall increasing, but the demand for a specific firm decreasing. Decreasing because the firm, as new firms enter, that firm is going to capture a smaller share. And so demand for this individual firm will be brought inwards until there's no profit to be made. Thus, getting the part of the competitive part of monopolistically competitive. Okay, let me pause here. Okay. And this is, you can see this here, um, where the profit is being eliminated in the short run in panel A, and then the demand curve is brought inwards because each firm is capturing a slightly smaller share. Now, what we see in terms of efficiency, to remind ourselves, under a perfectly competitive structure, which is what this picture is giving us, we are at the minimum of the average cost curve. Prices are the absolute lowest. There's no deadweight loss. There is no profit. This is the perfectly competitive world. By contrast, in the monopolistically competitive world, there is that small deadweight loss. Just trying to make this bigger here. There is that small deadweight loss. Prices are just a little bit higher, but we in the United States and in most other developed countries have absolutely no problem with monopolistically competitive structures existing, despite their slightly higher prices and slightly lower quantities. And the reason why is because you get variety, and with that variety, you get innovation. um I don't know, the world's a better, in some sense, as we're kind of like talking about this, the world's a better place because there's so many different varieties of colas out there that exist. The world's a better place because there are six different types of balsamic vinegar that I can buy at the grocery store, even though the balsamic vinegar probably tastes almost exactly the same, but not entirely the same. And they certainly had different packaging. Oh, the world's a better place with variety, with there being choice. And that's what we have in this discussion here. We don't generally see any desire to regulate these types of firms, these monopolistically competitive firms, because these firms they cause a very small deadweight loss. The price increase is very small, and there is that significant um, benefit to having more product diversity exist. Oh, RC Cola, man, I remember that. Huh. Um, I don't typically talk about these examples, but let me just say a few words about this. So, notice that, again, for each different um, brand, the major brands being Coke, Folgers, and Maxwell House, you see a great deal of elasticity, meaning sensitivity to price. And yes, there's nothing that tastes just like Coke or just like Folgers or Maxwell House. But what the role that RC Cola and chock full of nuts serve is they keep the price in check for the others. Because Coke and Folgers and Maxwell House know they cannot charge whatever they want. Because if they raise the price too high, customers will um, they will depart and go to RC Cola. They will depart and go to chock full of nuts. And what we see with those, let's call them off brands, RC Cola and chock full of nuts, is that you don't see, as high of an elasticity for those goods. But the market leaders often have a pretty high degree of elasticity, and thus limited marketing power and market power. Okay, now what about the oligopoly? What is an oligopoly? An oligopoly is basically doesn't have to be they don't have to be selling differentiated goods. It doesn't really matter um, what the products look like. What gives a what defines a monopoly basically is that there needs to be some significant barriers of entry, but also some significant profits that can be made as well. And so, from an investor's perspective, these are great things to invest in because, right, that profit is in some sense um, guaranteed because of those barriers to entry that exist and because of the competitive interactions between the firms within the oligopoly. You usually see oligopolies in very high cost industries. So the examples I give you here are automobile, steel, aluminum, petrochemicals, electrical equipment, and computers. Pretty difficult to enter most of those industries. And I'm surprised they didn't add on to this airlines, because that would be one of them too. And sometimes that barrier to entry isn't like the patent where it's a law or that you can't copy it or even regulated by the government. Instead, the oligopoly sometimes exists because it's just so expensive to enter the industry. I mean, think about it. I've said it before and I will absolutely say it again. There's a CEO out there that I just think is entirely underappreciated. His name is David Nealon. Um, and what makes him, I think, an amazing CEO is that he has started no less than like four new airlines. And each of them didn't like, he didn't keep starting new ones because they failed. He started new ones because he wanted to. And so he's now the CEO and he started an airline called Breeze Airways. Before that, he started JetBlue Airways. And before that, he worked at Southwest for a time. So he obviously didn't start Southwest Airlines, but he worked for them for a while. And before that, he had created, I think it was um, Pacific Southwest, I think. No, let's see if I actually even remember. Okay, well, it's not David Nealon, the actor. Maybe it's Niederman. No, it's not Niederman either. Well, why don't we just make my life easy here? Let's go to Breeze Airways and go to the Wikipedia entry, and then we'll see who it is. David Neeleman. Sorry about that, Davey. This guy here. He's just an underappreciated CEO. Founded five airlines: Morris Air, WestJet, JetBlue, Azul Brazilian Airlines, and then Breeze Airways. And look at that. Who does that? And that's an incredibly difficult industry to start in. Um, and he did it. Totally underappreciated. But you don't need me to talk about some CEO here. Oligopolies are incredibly difficult to um, calculate pricing output decisions because everything is strategic. and you really have to know the CEOs and the board of directors that you're negotiating with in setting up those kinds of things. So we don't actually draw a graph for the oligopoly. In fact, for the oligopoly, we really focus our attention on game theoretics, where basically we know we're in equilibrium when each player is essentially doing the best that they can and they don't have any reason to change their behavior. So we basically settle at a certain point. Most of the time, for an oligopoly, we're looking for specifically a Nash equilibrium. Nash, like John Nash. Um, each player is doing the best that it can, given what its players are doing. And so you especially see this in the case of the duopoly, where you have two firms competing with each other. And then we can also look at the Nash equilibrium um, in terms of the Cournot model, which you will in the problem set. And that's where each firm is going to simultaneously decide how much to produce, um, given some knowledge about what the other firm is going to do. Now, Nash, you've probably heard this term before. And that would be from the movie Beautiful Mind. Um, yeah, I guess it's 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Let me play it really quick here.
What do you want?
Not this commercial.
What a job that I don't hate.
Yeah, me too, buddy. So, this is not entirely how do you put this? In this era, thankfully, we wouldn't necessarily treat people like they were treated in the 1950s in terms of finding a suitor. In this case, the person enters a bar, and the people at the table all want to dance with her. And the issue is, who will it be that dances with her? So these are fellow mathematicians at Princeton, and that's John Nash. Actually, I'll add subtitle. Oh, okay.
She want a large wedding, you think? She said so, gentlemen. Pistols at dawn. Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, father of modern economics. In competition, individual ambition serves the common good. Exactly.
So there you go. So the idea before John Nash was the Adam Smith classical economics notion that individuals doing what they want ends up being the best for everyone.
Every man for himself, gentlemen. And those who strike out are stuck with their friends. I'm not going to strike out. You can lead a blonde to water, but you can't make a drink. I don't think so. All right, nobody move. She's looking over here. She's looking at Nash. All right, he may have the upper hand now, but wait till he opens his mouth. Remember the last time? The mystery books. Adam Smith needs revision.
There it is, right there. It's largely true, this narrative, to the extent that he remembers it, which isn't exactly perfect. Um, the idea here for John Nash is that the Adam Smith notion really reigned up until the 1950s, and then Nash's dissertation eventually led to um, much stronger notions of game theory. Um, where in a kind of a spirit of the Cold War and the Russians and the Americans have building all these nuclear weapons, there needed to be some strategic behavior between them. Um, so I'll just let this continue to play out here.
What are you talking about? If we all go for the blonde, we block each other. Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way.
So the notion there was each of these four people, these four men, um, knew what they all wanted. They all wanted to dance with that girl in the center, that woman in the center. And because they knew that, and they knew that it was going to end up where they wouldn't be able to dance with anyone, because of knowing what the other players were going to do, they made a different decision together, which is essentially what we're trying to do here for the oligopoly. That the oligopoly is going to act knowing that the other firm within that oligopoly is going to do the best that they can so that they can mutually make a better decision, being informed about what the other is going to do.
And we don't insult the other girls. That's the only way we win. That's the only way we all get laid. Adam's met said, best result comes from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself, right? That's what he said. That's right. Incomplete. Incomplete. Okay. Because the best result would come from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself and the group.
There it is. The best result comes from everyone doing the best for themselves and for the group.
This is some way for you to get the blonde on your own. You can go to hell. Governor Dynamics, gentlemen. Governor Dynamics. Adam Smith.
So there you go. It's a pretty. If you haven't seen the movie, you really should see it. It's well, eh, he's a mathematician who then becomes highly regarded by economists. He ends up having schizophrenia, falls out of academia for an incredibly long period of time, and then with better, um, drugs, pharmaceutical drugs to control it, he ends up um, becoming better after like a decades long recovery process, and then unfortunately just died a few years ago. Um, he and his wife stayed with him the entire time from well, most of the time. I think they broke up a few times, but um, he had they died in a taxi cab on their way, back from having given a lecture or speech somewhere, and they were in a taxi coming home from the airport, and I don't know, the taxi driver drove crazy, and they died. He died. I don't know if she died. Oh fuck! I guess I'll find out. I think they both died. Dead or alive. That's a horrible way to say it. Yeah, there he is, John Nash. Um, mm, yep, both him and his wife died near exit 8A in New Jersey. On his way home from Newark Airport, where he had just received the a Bell Prize. Um, but they weren't wearing their seatbelt. Let that be a lesson to all y'all. Wear your seatbelts. At least there's something good that came out of that. Um, so at this point, thinking of the oligopoly then as behaving in a strategic fashion, what we then need to do is actually draw the demand curve for each firm. And each firm knows what the other is going to do. So each firm can see the entire market at one point in time. Each firm knows that the other firm is going to behave in their best interest. Each firm knows that the other firm is going to set their marginal revenue equal to their marginal cost and then go up to their demand curve to find their price. And together they'll form the market. In this case, this is the first firm, this is the second firm, and together this is our market. What we solve for here are essentially reaction curves. Reaction curves are incredibly important with finding the Cournot equilibrium. The reaction curve tells us what the firm's output should be given what its competitor is going to do. That's the essence of the Nash equilibrium, doing the best that you can do given what the other player is doing. And so you can see here that for firm two's output is a function of the first firm's output. Firm one's reaction function, their output, Q1, is a function of Q2. The Cournot equilibrium is at the intersection of those two reaction curves, meaning that you find the Cournot equilibrium by essentially substituting the reaction function here into the reaction function here. So a Cournot equilibrium is a type of Nash equilibrium where, again, each firm is doing the best that they can given what the other firms are doing. It's a stable equilibrium. No firm is going to want to change its behavior given the current structure. And this Nash equilibrium um, this Nash equilibrium point is going to be pretty well known for each of the two firms as they're producing the product because, again, each firm already knows the reaction curves. So let's talk about how this kind of thing would be solved. Let's go through this step by step because you do, again, see this in the you will see this in the problem set as well. Um, so we have a market demand curve here. This is an inverse demand curve. And I'm telling you that the marginal cost for each of the firms is the same and it's equal to 0. So what we need to do is we need to first find the revenue for each firm. So total revenue is essentially P times Q. So total revenue for firm 1 would be this 30 minus Q times Q1 because this is for the first firm. But this Q is different because it's actually the summation of Q1 and Q2 times Q1. Then that would be 30 Q1 minus Q1 squared plus minus Q1 Q2. That'd be my total revenue. Which means that my marginal revenue for firm 1 would then be taking the first order partial with respect to Q1, which would make it 30 minus 2Q1 minus Q2, which is the same as what they found right here. Now, repeat that again for firm 2. Let's just do it. So total revenue for firm 2 is going to still be that 30 minus Q, which is that demand curve, times Q2, right? Because it's P times Q. Q1 plus Q2 times Q2, 30 Q2 minus Q1 Q2 minus Q2 squared. Marginal revenue for firm 2 would be 30 minus 2Q2 minus Q1. Okay. Set them then equal for each firm, equal to its marginal cost. In this case, it is 0. So 30 minus 2Q1 minus Q2 equaling 0, minus 30, negative 2Q1 minus Q2 equals negative 30. Add Q2, negative 2Q1 equals negative 30 plus Q2. Divide by negative 2, that gives me Q1 equaling 15 minus 0.5 Q2. Look at that. That's a firm 1 output in terms of firm 2, or firm 1 output in terms of firm 2. Repeat that again for firm 2, and you would get this. Just trust me. These right here are the reaction functions found by setting MR equal to MC. We had to find the MR by calculating the total revenue, TR. What we then need to do, I just kind of jumped to this, which is a little unfair. Let's get out of this, back this, insert a slide here, apply a different layout. Let's take that 15. So remember, these are each of the reaction functions. How do you find the Cournot equilibrium? We need to substitute this into right there. So it's going to be Q1 equaling 15 minus 0.5 times 15 minus 0.5 Q1, which would equal 15 minus 7.5 plus 0.25 Q1, equaling Q1. Subtract 0.25 Q1. That gets me 0.75 Q1 equaling 7.5. Divide each side by 0.75, and Q1 equals 10. If I repeat this whole same process for firm 2, Q2 will also equal 10. So that's how they actually got the 10. And then you could add them up and get the 20. With that 20, you can substitute that 20 into here, and you would also find that the price is equal to 10 because that would be P equals 30 minus 20, which is the addition of the two quantities. Then, besides the Cournot equilibrium, where the firms are still competing with each other, the other example would be some level of collusion. And with collusion, essentially, um, the firms are going to produce collectively less. Essentially, we follow the same steps, except the problem here is that we're not going to do Q1 and Q2. As you can see here, we essentially put in a Q here, but not Q1 or Q2. Start right here. And so this would then just be 30 times Q minus Q squared. Marginal revenue would then be 30 minus 2Q, which is kind of what I think exists right here. That 30 minus 2Q would then be set equal to 0, which is that marginal cost. 30 minus 2Q equaling 0. The Q is going to be 15. And if there's collusion, then the firms are just going to split that 15 down the line. So they're each going to produce 7.5. And as a result as well, we would find that these firms would charge more, which is generally why oligopolies aren't illegal, but collusions, generally speaking, are. Collusions in an explicit sense. And you can see that here, that the collusion curve exists below the reaction curves because these firms are then just sharing the profits. Now, within these oligopolies as well, we do have some discussion of how individuals are moving, the order in which they're moving. So the first one we're going to talk about here is the Stackelberg model. In the Stackelberg model, this would be an oligopoly where one firm is a first mover. It does what they're going to do first. And then as a result, the others react to that. So it's, in some sense, a reactionary model. And essentially, what we see is that the first firm, that the first mover, the first firm, has an advantage, which is why it's called first mover advantage. It's that the first firm will produce more and thus make more money. So let's keep the same demand curve here, 30 minus Q. Let's keep the same marginal cost here, MC1 equals MC2 equals 0. Now, what we know is that firm 2 will react to what firm 1 is doing. So the reaction curve is the same as we already solved. Q, right? And we know how to solve for a reaction function. We did that previously. So it'd be the 15 minus 1 half Q1. Now, for firm 1 is going to take their price times their quantity, and now what we see here is that firm 1, we can substitute in the reaction function for firm 2. And as it does that, we see that firm 1, once we solve for this, that firm 1 produces twice as much as firm 2. So firm 1 determines its output, then we substitute that actual quantity, not the reaction function, but the actual quantity, into firm 2's reaction function, and we will find that they will make less, the second mover. Besides the Stackelberg model, where we have the first mover, we then have the Bertrand model. And in the Bertrand model, um, here instead of looking at quantities, we're looking at prices, and the prices are going to be decided upon simultaneously. And in this case here, the firms are producing, because they're producing a homogeneous product, the prices charged will not be that different. Um, you're not going to have anything in your problem set specifically for the Bertrand model, so or in the exam. So I'm going to decline going through the specifics of this just in the interest of time. So let's just skip this, but do know what it is and how it exists. Okay. Where do I want to go next with this? Okay. Just trying to, in the interest of time, given that we're at the end of the course here, I got to figure out what can we do here with the remaining time that we have. Since we're not going to get to spend very much time with game theory, it just makes some sense to at least give me a chance to at least talk about this a little bit here. And it's one of the more famous non-cooperative games known as the Prisoner's Dilemma, which you may have seen in Econ 130. Hopefully you had enough time to deal with it and you somewhat remember it. The idea here is that this payoff matrix is known and made aware of to both players in this case, firm 1 and firm 2. And each of these two firms look like they can either charge a low price or a high price. The question is, which will they do? And what the payoff, if firm 1 charges $4 and firm 2 charges $4, they each will make $12. This is the payoff for firm 1. This is the payoff for firm 2. If firm 1 charges a lower price and firm 2 charges a higher price, firm 1 is going to make a lot of money off this because they're going to capture a lot of the market for having that lower price, being the low price leader. So they're going to capture a lot of money, firm 2 not so much. If firm 1 ends up being the high charger and firm 2 is the low price leader, then firm 2 captures most of the money. And if both of them can find a way to both charge a high price, then they could make more than if they both charged a low price. In the prisoner's dilemma, the problem is, what will the player do? Will they charge a low price or a high price? Um, if a player charges, let's say they both decide to charge a high price, they want to just make the most money. Each player faces a really strong incentive to defect or to dishonor that agreement. Because if they dishonor that agreement and they start charging a low price while the other guy is still charging the high price, they will make more money, $20, than if they both charged a low price or even if they both charged a high price. So, in some sense, you can't be at 1616, even though mutually that is a better choice. And that's because, again, there's a strong incentive to defect for firm one, a strong incentive to defect for firm two. And because each player knows that there's that strong incentive to defect, they end up the non-cooperative equilibrium, the Nash equilibrium, ends up being that they both charge a low price, 12.12. Or in the more typical setup of the prisoner's dilemma game, there's a crime that's been committed, and now the payoffs here are the amount of time you have as a jail sentence. Um, in this case, you can see in this prisoner's dilemma just how, because of that incentive to defect, it really doesn't work out well for each of the parties. They would be better off both just not confessing at all and each spending 10 years in jail. But because they each face an incentive to let the other guy not confess and they should confess, they could get 1 year in jail instead of two. And so they both end up collectively spending 5 years in jail each, which is obviously not good. This is significant because in a prisoner's dilemma game, this is typically where the players end up being. Um, a little bit. Probably one of the other things that becomes important for an oligopoly is then also its pricing behavior, whether it's going to signal its price and hope that others will then raise their price, or whether there's going to be some degree of price leadership, where some firm is going to behave in a certain way and then expect other firms to, um, in some sense, be given the license then to raise their price or drop their price because the other one did it and took the leadership to do that. Okay. Um, I'm going to end this here. Okay. That ends this chapter.